Hey guys, welcome back to more property neighbor stories. In this video, a ridiculous entitled Karen put an illegal fence around my lake and blocked me from entering my own private property. Let's dive right into the video to find out what happened. So I've had quite a few memorable experiences with strange neighbors, but a few years ago there was one incident in particular that really takes the cake. Just for a bit of background, I own a chunk of lakefront property that I inherited. It is quite scenic and I'm very lucky to have it. I also feel a pretty strong sense of responsibility towards keeping it pristine and making sure my family would be proud of it. Now, don't get me wrong, this lake is not massive, which is a pretty important detail when it comes to understanding the following events. It's fairly modest in fact, but there's a stretch of shoreline that falls completely within my property. In essence, we have a small private beach with water access that belongs to us and us alone. There are other sections of the shoreline that are public, but in my opinion, they're not quite as scenic or well maintained. I know that may sound like I'm bragging, but it's actually quite the opposite. Somehow taking care of my property ended up causing all the problems that followed and really pissed one of my neighbors off. In a word, they were envious, extremely envious. Over the years that I worked on the property, I had a bunch of unpleasant encounters with one neighbor in particular, who we shall call Karen. It started with her giving backhanded compliments about how I was so lucky to have a stretch of lake that was so beautiful that it barely required any work on my part, which was just obviously false. It took a painful amount of money to keep everything clean and handle the upkeep, but I think she was just trying to justify why her own property was kind of a mess. After a while, it escalated into her outright gossiping behind my back to other neighbors about me being rude, which was kind of funny because I was the only one that tried to make polite conversation between us. Whenever we ran into each other, I said hello and she just ignored me. And just to be clear, I only know about the gossip because our other neighbors came and warned me, so that should give you some idea of which way the wind was blowing and who the neighborhood liked more. I could have ignored all this easily enough. After all, everyone has a bad neighbor at one point or another. However, this soon took a turn that I was not expecting. One day, out of nowhere, Karen asked me if she could use my private shoreline for a party. Or to be more accurate, she told me that she was having a party and asked when would be a good time. I laughed incredulously in her face because it just had to be a joke, right? Was she playing up her Karen vibes for a laugh? Was it possible that she was actually self-aware? No, of course not. When I did not instantly agree to let her host a party on my property, she blew a fuse and said something about me being entitled and then scurried off yelling rude insults over her shoulder. There was definitely something about me being lazy and ungrateful and rude, which was remarkably ironic. I gotta say that I felt a little proud in a convoluted sort of way. See, she had some private water access too, so she could have easily thrown this party on her own property. The only problem was that she was right. My little stretch of beach did look much better. In a way, she was complimenting me, she'd just gone about it in the worst and rudest way possible. Well, over the coming weeks, she started to bring up the topic again and again. This was mostly via passive-aggressive letters, emails and text messages, so it was easily enough to politely tell her no. After a while, I started being less polite and more succinct, and then I started ignoring her altogether. Eventually, it died down and I figured I was in the clear. Oh boy, what a fool I was. For unrelated reasons, I ended up taking a brief trip out of town. After a few unexpected developments, it ended up being a prolonged stay, so it was a couple weeks before I finally got back home, and what I found there absolutely shocked me. Somehow, someone had managed to build a fence around the lake. And I don't mean part of the lake, I mean that someone went around the entire perimeter and set up a big ugly fence. It was not a very good fence and was mostly just a flimsy piece of crap, but that's not very surprising considering the whole thing got thrown up in a week or two at most. Like I said earlier, the lake was not huge, so this was within the realms of possibility, but only barely. Now, I know I said someone built it, but I had a pretty good idea who was to blame. I just couldn't wrap my head around how she thought this was a good idea or how it would enable her to throw her little parties. Maybe she just wanted to throw a petty temper tantrum to show off just how much power and influence she had. If an ugly eyesore fence was the best she could manage, then I cannot say that I was impressed. As you may have noticed, this fence was a pretty egregious violation of my rights. After all, part of that shore did belong exclusively to me, so at least part of the fence was entirely illegal. I figured the rest of it was probably just as illegal too, but I did not want to dive right in and confront Karen. I thought she might try to spin things and turn herself into a victim, probably claiming that I damaged her property when her crappy fence inevitably fell apart. I thought it might take a couple of weeks at most before it was halfway ruined, without any interference whatsoever. What I did do was chat up some of my neighbors asking just what the hell was going on here. They were just as confused as me, and more than a few asked if they should be getting lawyers. That sounded like a pretty solid idea, so I went ahead and started shopping around for a waterfront property lawyer. I thought it was too specialized to exist, but you would be surprised. In any case, there was one more little detail I gleaned about Karen's scheme. She was apparently trying to sell people lake access permits. If you bought one, then you were theoretically allowed to go through the gates and hang out on the lake side of the fence. Or I guess you could just step through some of the gaping holes caused by part of the fence that were already falling over, since that was going to be much easier than going all the way to the gate. Needless to say, when I finally did have a chat with a lawyer that I felt understood the situation, I knew we had this in the bag. I had thought that Karen might get a slap on the wrist and have to tear the whole fence down at her own expense, as well as maybe a few fines here and there. I was not expecting the whole laundry list of offenses that my lawyer brought up, ranging from crossing property lines to blocking legal access and environmental regulation violations. That last one was the most shocking because I did not expect the penalties to be quite so harsh. It makes sense when you think about it, I suppose, but Karen was about to get hit with the worst surprise of her life. The next few days involved a ton of effort on my part, but I don't feel any of that was wasted. In short, I meticulously filed complaints with as many agencies as I could, including a zoning board, water authority, and building inspector, among others. I basically just went as broad as I could within reason and did all the groundwork to make sure that there was an extensive paper trail when things finally hit the fan. My lawyer also recommended that we seek an emergency injunction to get the fence removed as soon as possible, so that is exactly what we did. However, when Karen was informed, I'm sure you can guess exactly what happened. If you guessed that she refused to comply, then you are right on the money. I know I said I was taking things slow and doing things carefully, so I could not resist giving her the notice personally. They were sending it in the mail as well, but I wanted to see the look on her face when she got the news. She was utterly shocked, she screamed at me, and she said that I was ruining her life, and then she said she was gonna ruin my life. The last thing she said was that the fence was gonna stay whether I like it or not, and then she slammed the door in my face. As I headed home, I had no idea what was going through her head at the time, but I would have bet that she was expecting that to delay things and give her more time to explore her options. Well, what she didn't realize was that she had made a much worse mistake by refusing to rip the fence up herself. Instead, the county hired a crew to come in and demolish the whole thing. I don't know how much they got paid, but the crew was definitely bigger than it needed to be. I'm pointing this out because the bill got sent straight to Karen. If she had played her cards right, then she could have obeyed the injunction and found a much cheaper service to handle everything. But seriously, I cannot say I'm surprised that things turned out the way they did. And that was just the start of her financial woes. She racked up thousands and thousands in fines and restoration costs, as well as all the different agencies started to act on my complaints. The investigations were short and swift, probably because the evidence was so damning. Before the whole incident, I might have been sympathetic about her financial situation and inability to pay a bunch of surprise bills. However, even though the fence was a piece of crap, it still must have cost a pretty penny to install. If she had enough money to throw around for a petty power play, then she had enough money to pay for the ecological damage she caused along the way. Then again, maybe she really did not have any money after blowing it all on the fence, because it was not long before she quickly sold her home and fled. Of course, that could also have been because her reputation was completely ruined, but who knows, she certainly did not have any friends to tell within the community, and most of her last few days were spent screeching about how I had ruined her life and overstepped my boundaries. There was something even more ironic about that last one. Anyway, things got pretty quiet after she left. Just to make sure that a situation like this did not arise again in the future, I went ahead and made the boundaries of my property much clearer. I did not want to mar the natural beauty of the shore, but I think I found some pretty elegant markers that blended in well with the scenery. For a double dose of irony, I ended up reusing some of the wood from her demolished fence. The county also updated their regulations and clarified the language. If nothing else, I'm glad they did it for anyone who finds themselves in my situation in the future. Looking through rules and ordinances for hours upon hours was not particularly fun, so I'm glad that will be much simpler now. And the next one is an absolutely amazing malicious compliance story that you don't want to miss. It is titled, "Employees are not allowed to leave the break room on their break." And by the way, if you have ever found yourself in a similar situation with awful neighbors like the Karen from before, please let me know about your petty little neighbor conflicts in the comments because I would love to see them. So the next one starts like this. This happened a few years ago when I worked at McDonald's. The one I worked in was near a bunch of schools, so most of the staff was high school kids. As summer vacation started, we began having the trouble of an employee getting break and then spending their break eating their meal and conversating with their friends who were still working in the kitchen. It was having a seriously bad effect on productivity as well as posing quite a few health risks, so our manager finally initiated a rule that if you were on your break, you could not leave the break room until your break was over. This went swimmingly until the kids went back to school. We then had a new problem, so short staffing during break cycles meant that our ticket times would skyrocket during rushes. Management lifted the rule so that employees on break could clock in early and help out with the rush. However, the district manager did not like the implications of employees working shortened or no break shifts and forcefully reinstated the rule. They also doubled down by saying that employees who tried to work during their scheduled break would be written up and/or terminated for doing so. So, cue my malicious compliance. The date was 4/20, a day when nobody wants to be working at any fast food place, much less McDonald's. We had been getting slammed so hard from the opening of the store that we called in extra help from other stores, including the regional and district managers. As the break cycle began, the management was pleased with the sub-2-minute ticket times they had managed to maintain, a few breakthroughs and we were managing well, and then came my break. As soon as I sat down to eat, someone came into the store and ordered 47 double quarter pounders. This was right after the fresh initiative where all quarter pounders were made fresh, so this was already a minor panic. Immediately after that order, someone in the drive-thru ordered 75 20-piece nugget meals. The amount of panic in the kitchen was palpable. I was comfortably lounging in a chair, browsing my phone and enjoying my meal while the kitchen struggled to keep up with the orders. As ticket times began to soar, the management did exactly as I expected. District manager came into the break room and demanded me to end my break early and help in the kitchen. My response was very simply, "I'm sorry, but according to the rules you made, I can be written up or terminated for completing your request." I then continued browsing my phone, trying to enjoy the last 10 minutes of my break. The regional manager entered the room and said that he would personally terminate me if I did not do the thing that I was not supposed to do. The other employee who was on break with me immediately rose and clocked in despite still having 10 minutes left on her break. She was written up for breaking the rule after the shift was over, so I felt good sitting in my chair and continuing to ignore them. In the aftermath, the people who made the giant orders took what was made after half an hour and left with refunds for the unmade food. Nearly $150 each. Customers who were waiting for smaller orders were compensated with gift cards for their patience, yet many walked out without even getting their orders. We paid out nearly $1,500 in gift cards because customers were walking out on orders without collecting them, so we had nearly $5,000 in food waste that night. All of the closers went home with nearly 2 bundle boxes of burgers, fries and nuggets. Regional and district manager were moved to a different region. The rule was edited to say that you were able to clock back in early at the manager's discretion in the event of a rush. Because I was the only employee who held this ground against the regional and district managers during the rush, I was rewarded with free meals and drinks until I moved away from my hometown and could not eat at that McDonald's anymore. Although, when I come to visit friends, I occasionally get rung up a manager discount by the few employees who still remember me. And yeah guys, I gotta say, that was one of the funniest malicious compliance / petty revenge stories I've ever read, I gotta say. Anyway, the next one is titled, "I purposely dropped my shopping basket on a stranger's foot," posted on r/petty revenge. So I was at this local grocery store a few blocks away from my house. I was just minding my own business, waiting in line. I was literally next, about to check out, when out of nowhere, boom, this woman cuts right in front of me. At first I was like, okay, whatever. She only had 3 items, so I thought, fine, no big deal. I was gonna let it go, but then she looked at me. Not just a glance, nope, she gave me that look. You know, the one where they can scan you from head to toe like they are silently judging everything about you. Yeah, that look, as if I was the one in the wrong. And that is when it happened. My intrusive thoughts, they clocked in. I took a step closer, did not say a word, and just dropped my basket right on her foot. It was not even that heavy, but the little thud it made, oh, it was so satisfying. She flinched and I swear I heard her grasp. But the best part? I looked at her, gave a slight smile and said, "Oh, sorry." Then I picked up my basket like nothing happened and placed my items on the counter. I mean, come on, I was next in line. And yeah guys, this was absolutely amazing petty revenge, and that is why I love this subreddit. And now let's move on to the next story. It starts like this. My family is from what I would say is a middle-ish class background from the north of England. Both my dad and uncle went through comprehensive school education during the 60s and 70s. My uncle proved to have a talent in science through secondary school and so later applied for multiple universities around the country, including Oxford. Now, Oxford University is well known as one of the top-notch elite universities and so quite well-to-do and posh. Actually, snobby posh. Oxford University turned him down. They considered comprehensive school education as not good enough. It was not grammar or private school education, and they were pretty explicit about it at the time. Roll on to the 90s, my uncle is now one of the foremost experts in his field and is a highly respected scientist. At the time, he was working for a research establishment over in the USA, and it is now 1993 or 94 and he receives a letter from, wouldn't you know, Oxford University. And this time, instead of dismissing his comprehensive school education, they are offering for him to come over for a job interview. He accepts but points out that he's in America, so the prestigious university offered to fly him over on Concorde. They roll out the red carpet to really butter him up. My dad picks him up from the airport and, to my dad's horror, my uncle is in his best I'm relaxed gear. A shirt that is dirty, shorts and flip-flops rocking his usual scruffy beard. Really no job interview worthy at all. My dad thought that because he's going for this high-end Oxford University job interview, he would at least put on his best suit. After all, the university was trying to poach him back to the UK. Not looking like he just walked off a beach in the Gulf of Mexico to grab a drink at a bar. So my dad drops my uncle off and waits in the car park. 1 hour later, my uncle reappears, gets in the car and asks to be taken to the airport. My dad asks him how it goes, expecting to have been there longer in the car park waiting for him. They offered me the job, but I turned it down. I told them that I wasn't good enough for you when I was 18, and they are not good enough for me now. The university was also paying for his Concorde flight home again. I honestly don't know what would have been louder, the mic drop or the jaw drop. And damn, Ripe Stars, I gotta say, this dude is an absolute legend. Not only for letting Oxford University waste money on a flight, but also for holding that grudge for such a long time. I gotta say, that is very unique. Let me know what you think about this story in the comments. And before we end the video, we will read one last story from r/pettyrevenge, just because it was so nice. This one is titled Racist Rider in My Uber. So I was driving Uber in Richmond, VA. I picked up a party of 4 from a very affluent suburb. We are talking old money. The impression I got was that these 4 young white people were old friends who had gone separate ways for college and were reuniting while on break. The music I had playing was pop radio. Justin Bieber was playing. As I did with all customers, I asked if they would like me to change to a different station or they could select from one of the many CDs that I had. One of the young men said, "Yeah, put it on country station. I don't know how much more of this cool music I can tolerate." That is such an old-fashioned racist term that it took a second for it to register in my mind what he had said. I've never in my 49 years ever heard anyone use that word in that way, so I casually said, "Sure," and changed the channel to a country station. Then after changing the channel, I realized what he said. I looked him in the mirror and said, "Wait, what did you say?" He tried to walk it back by saying that he said some BS that rhymed with coon. I had already decided that I was gonna pull over and demand that they all get out, and we were in the middle of nowhere, no streetlights or anything. Lucky for them, their friends came to the rescue. One of the young women said, "I'm pretty sure you said coon." And then all 3 of them tore into him. They were yelling at him, telling him how much of a damn idiot he is and he needs to shut the F up, and generally just tore him to shreds. At one point, one of the young women said, "Besides, Justin Bieber is white, you damn idiot." So I decided not to punish the other 3 for his misdeeds. It still didn't feel right though. A few seconds later I laughed as I realized the perfect revenge. I changed the channel to the most gangster hip-hop station in the city and blasted the music for the rest of the ride while laughing my ass off and rocking out to it. No clue if they tipped me or if they gave me 1 star, but regardless, it was so worth it. And yeah guys, thank you for watching, please don't forget to subscribe and I will see you again tomorrow.